All right, good morning, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about programming fundamentals. In part one, we're going to dive into JavaScript and Python all together. We're going to talk about why we're learning JavaScript and Python, where they're mostly utilized inside of the industry, what commonalities they have between one another, and the differences between one another. Now, from there, we're going to do a little bit of setup to make sure that we have a Docker that's able to execute both our JavaScript and Python scripts. And then we'll do a dive into variables, how to name them, and what a variable actually is. From there, we'll dive into primitive data types. We'll cover the print function, the console.log function, the type function, the type of function. We'll dive into strings. I'll quickly demonstrate how to split, slice strings, and create and interpolated strings. And then we'll go ahead and take a look at some documentation as to what other methods there are for strings and how to utilize them. We'll talk about numbers and integers, and then floats, which are unique to Python. We'll talk about Booleans and comparison operators. And then we'll dive into null and none and undefined. Finally, we'll end our lecture by talking about complex data types, such as arrays and lists, objects, and dictionaries. At this point, does anyone have any question over what we will be covering in part one of our lesson? Okay, fantastic. Doesn't seem like we have any questions, so let's go ahead and get started. Here we have Node.js and we have Python. Now, what are these two things very commonly used for? Well, JavaScript, a little bit of history of JavaScript. As some of you may have noticed at this point, JavaScript has a tendency of not making sense whenever you're writing code in JavaScript, right? I personally am not the biggest fan of this coding language. It is a very good language to learn and pick up, and it has very many utilities, right? At this point, it's utilized for front-end development, it's utilized for back-end development. I think it's still very much lagging behind when it comes to data analytics and anything outside of web development. Um, but I may be wrong in that case, right? But Node.js is primarily utilized to be able to create web applications, right? We have things like React, we have things like Vue.js. There's the popular Merge stack where we have MongoDB working in the background as our database. We have React, we have Express handling all of our routing. And all of this may be a bunch of lingo that all of you are not familiar with. But know that those technologies exist and they're all built on top of JavaScript code. All right. Now, how did JavaScript come about? And why is it known as the language of the web? Well, we talked about this in our Intro to Full Stack Application lecture, where when the internet was first created, it was nothing but pages being linked to other pages, right? Everything was just index HTML files connected to other HTML files. Well, somebody came along the lines and said, hey, I want to make this look nice. And that's where CSS came about. All right, we started being able to add some CSS, adding some colors, placing things in different directions. There was different organization patterns when it came to divisions. Well, JavaScript was then added as the muscles of an application, where essentially now I want to add behavior to an app, and I'm going to add this behavior utilizing things like JavaScript. Right, so that's why it's important for us to learn it. It's known as the language of the web. The majority of the HTTP calls that you're going to see, especially in this course, will be JSON, and that directly relates to JavaScript objects. All right. Now, Python. Why Python? Right? If I just told you guys that JavaScript is a tool that's used for web development and that it can be used for pretty much the entire full stack application, what's the purpose of learning Python? Right? Well, you're technically right. We don't necessarily need Python to be able to build a full stack application. We could go ahead and build everything with just JavaScript. But Python's not just utilized in web development. Python is mainly used for full stack frameworks such as Django um, and Flask. Both of those frameworks can provide an entire server-side application. Um, and Python is also dynamic enough to where it fits really well in the data science community. There's a lot of data analytics that gets done in Python, a lot of machine learning that gets done in Python. All of that side of programming pretty much belongs to the Python realm, right? That's why Jupyter Notebooks is so popular in the data science community because all of the Python code can easily be written and translated with other developers. All right. Does anyone have any questions over why we'll be learning both JavaScript and Python? Okay, here's one main thing that I want to make sure that everybody understands before you leave Code Platoon. All right. We are teaching you a specific tech stack, but that is not the one and only tech stack that's available. Like I mentioned, Python is also flexible for building things in a technology named Flask. All right. And oh, interesting. There you go. And Flask is a really good server-side framework that can help you build an entire server-side application. The only issue with Flask is that it's not batteries included. So a lot of the things that Django comes built in with, you're going to have to build them from scratch. But know that this is also something that's available for you to explore if you're interested in just pursuing more Python frameworks. In JavaScript, if you want to create a server, there's Node for being able to stand a server. Right? And you could go through this to be able to learn how to create your server just utilizing Node as well. Um, and there are other front-end libraries such as Vue.js. Here we are, right? Which is not the same as React. It serves kind of the same purpose. It builds a front-end application, right? And it's meant to build your user interface. But it works a little bit differently. It's differently in the fact that it doesn't have a virtual DOM. But we'll talk about that later on once we dive into our front-end frameworks. So we're learning the very fundamental language, but the language itself has many frameworks that it can adapt to. All right. Now let's talk about some commonalities between these two, right? JavaScript and Python aren't necessarily very different whenever you are writing code. There are fundamental differences that are happening under the hood. I'm not going to get into those inside of this lecture, but know that they don't operate the same. They're both runtime languages, so that's something that they have in common, meaning that when they analyze a script, they work from top to bottom, right? So they're both runtime languages, meaning scripts are executed from top to bottom. They both support things like variables. They both have automatic trash collection. For any of you who may have any experience inside of C or yeah, inside of C or any sort of more in-depth languages, you've had to deal with the painful concept of trash collection. Trash collection essentially means that once the script is done, you have to manually tell your machine what to do with that allotted memory that it used whenever it was executing your script, right? It doesn't automatically become available again. It actually stays occupied unless you yourself free it up. All right. So they both support variables. They both are actually able to support functions or fu what's called as functional programming. And they're both actually able to support object-oriented programming, which is a concept we're going to be learning next week. Right. So these are both things that belong to both JavaScript and Python. Now, where do they differ? Well, JavaScript was created in a hasteful manner, for lack of better words. So there's a little bit of bending that's not allowed, right? So JavaScript is considerably more flexible. And some people like that flexibility. Some people say that that's actually one of the reasons why they love JavaScript. It's because it's so much more flexible. That's actually one of the reasons why I am not a fan of JavaScript. I do not like my programs to be flexible. Right? So Python is still flexible, um, but it's not as flexible as JavaScript, right? It's closer to, I don't want to call it a type-oriented language, but it's definitely closer to a strict language than what JavaScript is, right? Now, in JavaScript, everything under the hood is actually an object. And in Python, everything under the hood is known as a class. Now, JavaScript utilizes for their variable naming something called snake casing, where Python utilizes, oh, I got those backwards. Python utilizes snake casing, and JavaScript utilizes something called camel casing. And we could actually make a quick example of that. So here's camel casing. You can see that I'm actually increasing that ladder. And then snake casing, it's just this underscore that's happening in between the words. All right. Let's see here. There was something else that I wanted to add in here, and I apologize, but it has now slipped my mind. Snake casing, camel casing. All right, we'll have to figure out the rest as we go along as to some more of their differences. All right, but this is basically over the hood, what they kind of have in common, what they have in difference, or what they run in difference. Um, and if you're trying to write up a quick language or you're trying to write up a really quick server, flexibility and speed is what's most important to you. For example, you don't care if things return something like undefined, then definitely run with something like JavaScript, but that's something extremely unique to JavaScript, right? Like the concept of undefined doesn't really exist in any other programming language, as far as I know. Correct me if I'm wrong, Kevin or the TAs, but I'm pretty sure that's extremely unique to JavaScript. All right. Well, these are our languages that we're going to be learning today. Now let's go ahead and dive into variables. A variable, you could simply think of a variable as a empty box, right? And this empty box we're able to actually place things inside of. Now, by things, I mainly mean data types. We'll be covering what those data types are, but you could think of this as a collection of characters known as a string. You could think of it as a number, or whether something is true or false. Now, any of these data types could be placed inside of this box. But what makes a variable special is that it actually holds a location inside of memory. For example, if I write this string as my script is running, once it's done reading that string ceases to exist because it's not being utilized. It's not being retained anywhere. I need a variable in order to be able to store it and access it later on. Now, there is a white label here at the very front. This is what you name your variable, and it should be descriptive to what it is that you're storing. If I was storing a string that was a representation of my name, I would specify, hey, this is my name in Python. And if it was in JavaScript, I would specify, this is my name. All right, so that's all a variable really is a memory location that you can retain information by putting data types into it. Does anyone have any questions regarding variables? Okay, awesome. In that case, let's go ahead and put it into practice. And then I apologize to everybody, but I am going to start ignoring this Zoom chat. I'm seeing a lot of side traffic in there, and I see Kevin and the TAs are tackling it down. So if you do have any questions for the classroom, please put them inside of the Dakota questions channel. All right. Now, I'm going to come over to main.js. We can see here I have a console.log, hello world, main.py. I have a print hello world. I'm actually going to delete those. I'm going to create my very first string. All right, so I'm going to call this my name. You can see that this is a snake case. Let me quickly put this Copilot to sleep so that it stops filling out my lecture for me. And this my name isn't necessarily declaring a variable just yet. You can see here that VS Code is actually trying to give me an opportunity to fix myself by telling me, hey, this doesn't exist. This isn't defined. It doesn't hold anything inside of it. Well, if I print, which is going to show me the output of my name here in my terminal, I should be getting an error. Ah, there you go. So I get an error telling me my name is not defined. Okay. Well, I know that inside of this box, I'm going to be placing my actual name, but how do I make the connection between these two? Can anybody help me out? How do I actually store something inside of a variable? Let's hear it running.
Would it not be with an equal sign?
Yeah, easy peasy, right? We got to make sure that we assign. So a singular equal sign is utilized for assignment. I am making a variable of my name, a box holding the label of my name. I am putting into my name the string of Francisco. And now if I run this, I can see that Francisco prints out onto my terminal. Let's try this out in JavaScript. I'm going to go ahead and write my name, and I'm going to console.log my name. And let's see what this does. Let's go ahead and do node main.js. Well, I also get an error whenever I try to execute this script. And I get told, hey, my name is not defined. Okay, nice. Let me go ahead and do a whole let here for my name. Let's clear this out and let's execute this. Okay. Now, after I executed that, this ended up working. I get undefined. Well, why is that happening? Can anybody give me an example as to why I'm seeing this error? Go for it, Ronnie.
Because you had set it up to basically hold and contain a value, but you didn't assign a value to it.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so I made my variable, right? I made a box holding my name, but I never actually told it to hold anything. Now, how did I make a variable without the equal sign? In Python, I had to add an equal sign. So why is it that in JavaScript it's just being able to be recognized as a variable? Go for it, Kaylee.
It's let. Let makes it a
Nice.
variable in JavaScript.
Yeah, this let keyword makes it a variable, right? And it makes it a mutable variable. So I just utilized the word mutable, and that kind of tells me that there should be something called immutable. Can anybody tell me the difference between these two? Let's hear it, Kenny.
Are mutable objects or items that we can reassign values to, whereas immutable we cannot, but rather would have to create a new list or array.
A copy of, right? Okay, nice. So, when I learned this word, or when I was in your guys' seats learning this concept, I remember thinking of mute and thinking of the mute button that goes on the TV, right? Now, that was a very bad analogy because that didn't actually help me understand what this means. Later on, as I was geeking out with one of my friends, he was like, no, don't think of mute as in the mute button. Think of mute as in a mutant, like the X-Men, right? My personal X-Men or favorite X-Men would be Wolverine, right? So Wolverine is a mutant, meaning that he can be mutated. There was a mutation that happened to his DNA, and that's why he's the way he is, all right? Immutable is someone who cannot be mutated. And mutable is something that can be mutated. So something that can change is mutable, something that cannot change is immutable. All right, so we just discovered a couple of terms there. We figured out how we create this variable, and now I'm going to go ahead and assign Francisco. All right, and now I'm going to go ahead and execute this one more time, and now we get Francisco outputted. Okay, nice. Awesome. We're able to create our variables. We're able to assign some values, print them out, or console.log them out. Um, Now, I do have a couple of questions here as far as my execution goes. Notice that I'm inside of my terminal, and maybe I should see something like this. Let's go Python, and here we'll go JS. When I execute my Python script, I can just say Python main.py. And that gives me Python Francisco. When I do node main.js, that gives me JavaScript Francisco. Why is that? Why is it that I'm using two different commands to essentially execute a script? And is it really a command, or am I just calling upon a technology? What's happening inside of my terminal when I actually type this out? This here, Kenny.
Are are you calling for the terminal to run whatever's inside the main.js?
Okay, very close. Yeah. So I wanted to run what's inside of the main.js. Okay. Anybody else? Let's hear it, Abdel.
I want to say since JavaScript was written to run inside the browser, you're gonna have to use Node to make it function inside your machine. However, Python was developed to run on your machine natively, so you just reference it and it runs.
Okay, nice. Yeah. So I think Abdel's kind of starting to get to it, right? Essentially, what we're doing here is we are reading a file. Main.js, even though I'm adding the .js extension, it's nothing but a text file. All scripts, regardless of what it is that you name them, .py, .cs, .css, .html, they're just text files. All right. And the convention that's at the very end is just to help either VS Code or other developers be able to understand what kind of technology needs to be used to be able to read this file. All right. So, a pretty good example of that. Let's go ahead and dive into this. Let's do a touch example .txt. And so here's example.txt. And I'm just gonna go ahead and write some JavaScript code here. This is from txt. And I'm gonna utilize Node, which is the technology that we installed in InstallFest, right? Node, which runs JavaScript, to read example.txt. And you can see that it reads it perfectly fine, right? I get, hey, this is from txt. It was able to recognize this as JavaScript code. I could write Python code in here. All right, for example, I could change this to print. Oh, and now if I run Python ex.txt, I get this is from txt because I'm utilizing Python to read the txt file. All right, so all files are just text files. And the extension is utilized to describe what technology I should be using to read said file. .py means that these are Python files and they should be read by Python. Main.js means that it's a JavaScript file and it should be read by Node. Nice. Now, why Node instead of Python or something like similar to Python? Abdel hit it right on the head. JavaScript was created to be a language that's run inside of the browser. So because we don't have a browser natively, instead we're using Node to be able to read it. All right. So by calling main.py, or excuse me, by calling Python or calling Node, we are then telling it, here is a file that I want you to read, execute said file, and show me the output. All right. Awesome. All right. Well, now it's time to get a little bit fancy with this. We were able to read our files. We're able to place variables inside of this box. But yesterday we learned some Docker. And now it's time to start throwing some Docker conventions in here, right? Here I have a dockerfile.js, I have a dockerfile.py. Yesterday we learned about the concept of Dockerfile. But this .js and .py, that's new, right? Before we haven't seen this before. This is just a naming convention to help me understand what this Docker file is meant to do. I could have named it dockerfile.javascript or dockerfile execute.js. For me, in simplicity's sake, I just did .js and .py. All right. Well, let's set these up. I want to set up a Docker file that can read main.js, execute it, and show me its output. How can I do that? Let's hear it, Edward.
Can you use the import function?
Why am I importing? Or what am I trying to import?
Importing the code that you have written inside your JavaScript file, and then you can then use the Docker file to execute it.
Okay, so at some point I do have to make my code come over, so I can maybe pseudocode this a little bit, right? I can say, hey, I need to ensure JS file gets copied into my image. Okay? But there's a lot more that needs to happen here, right? And I'm not importing, I'm copying. All right, we just learned this yesterday, and I got a lot of feedback yesterday saying that we felt comfortable with this. So I'm expecting a little bit more interaction, everyone. Go for it, James. You're muted.
We got, yeah, we gotta specify the version first, right?
Okay, nice. So how do I do that?
From, and then do we have to pick a version of the, the, are we doing, what is this, JavaScript?
It wouldn't be a version of JavaScript, right? What do I use to be able to execute JavaScript code?
Why am I drawing a blank right now?
Node.
Sick. Yeah, so we're gonna get from node. In this case, it's okay if I utilize latest, right? Because it's just gonna be executing my JavaScript code. Awesome. So there you go. I have a container that's gonna be utilizing Node.js. What would be next?
You gotta specify the folder, right? I forget the command for that one.
Okay, nice. So I'm gonna create a folder called app.
And then copy.
Awesome. So now I can go ahead and copy. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and copy. What I want to copy is main.js, and I want to copy it into my app.
Lastly, command, CMD.
Okay.
And then you specify, I forget this one. I think you specify it's something and then file, right? I forget.
Okay, so what would be the file?
Uh, is it, are we doing main.js? Is that what we're doing?
Okay, so main.js. See it, Albert.
It'd be cat.
Cat? Okay, well, cat's probably going to just relay the contents back
Yeah,
to
okay. That was incorrect then. Okay.
me. Anybody else want to give it a shot? Let's hear it, Abdel.
Node, lowercase.
Awesome. So we're going to do node at main.js. All right. So there's our entire script for being able to run JavaScript. Let's go through this process, right? I'm going to go ahead and do Docker images to see what I have. Currently, I have one singular image. Nice. I'm going to go ahead and build the one for running JavaScript. So I'm going to go ahead and do Docker build -t run JS. And it is going to be found here, but I have a new flag that I want to add here. where I'm going to specify the file name. The file name will be docker file.js. All right. Let's go ahead and run that. It says it was able to read it. And if I run docker images now, you can see I have my run.js. Okay. So now I could docker run --rm run JS. And there I get JS Francisco. Right, so there you go. We did a little bit of work, but we got JavaScript running inside of a Docker file. And now I can share this with anybody. And as long as they utilize my Docker container, they can get this JavaScript script running with Docker. All right. Any questions over how we set up Docker? Easy peasy. Let's do the same thing for Python here. I'm going to do this on the quicker side because I am noticing that we are starting to run out of time. So I'm going to go to Python at latest. Here we want Python py. And what I want to execute will be Python 3 at main.py. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and build this out. I'm going to do Docker build. This one is py. And instead of run.js, I'm going to name this run py. I'm going to go ahead and Docker run --rm run py. And there we can get Python Francisco. All right, so extremely similar to one another. Both of them need a working directory to be able to copy files into. I am copying main.py. I am copying this JS file as well. And then afterwards, the command. Here in dockerfile.js, I'm utilizing node at main.js. In dockerfile.py, I'm utilizing Python 3 at main.py. All right. Now we got all of our Docker files out of the way. We understand how variables work and how to save information. At this point, does anyone have any questions over the material that we've covered before we continue? Go for it, Kenny.
Just a question as to why down in command we have Python 3, but in from we have just Python.
Yeah, interesting. Very good observation there. So here, I'm running Python 3. But in my command line, if I try to execute it, are you talking about my command line or are you talking about in the Docker file in line 1?
Right. How come we have in line 8 Python 3, but in line 1 only Python?
Got you. So Python 3 is actually what's utilized to call Python. All right. Here, if I do which Python, you're going to see that this is an alias that's tied to Python 3. So every time I type in Python, what I see as a user is just Python. What my machine sees as an executioner is Python 3. All right. So the same thing here in our Docker file. I'm installing the technology of Python, but when I need to call the technology of Python, I do it with Python 3.
And
Does
just
that
to
answer
say
your
that,
question, Kenny?
Absolutely. Thanks, boss.
and just to add
Go
on
for it,
there,
Kevin.
inside the Docker container, it should also be Python should also be okay to use.
Nice. Is that what you wanted to add as well, Abdel, or did you have a
I was
question?
gonna ask about that. What if it's a list already in the machine? Can I just type out Python?
You should be able to. Yeah. All right. Awesome. So now we got everything lined up, Docker set up, and we can continue on with our lecture. All right, so next we're going to be go ahead and diving straight into some primitive types. We kind of already talked about the print and console.log statements, and we've seen them in action. But soon we're going to be diving into type and type of. We'll talk about strings. We'll talk about numbers, integers, booleans, null, none, and undefined, everybody. But before we do so, let's go ahead and take a break. I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording here. All right, everybody, welcome back. Now, while we were gone for a break, I did make a small change. I added this runner.sh, which is just essentially going to build my Docker files, or excuse me, my Docker images, so that when I run them, I could see the brand new output from each one of them, right? I can go ahead and let's go ahead and take a look at what they do as of now. When I execute them, you can see it builds my images. And then it gives me a nice little, hey, JS output starts here. We should probably add some more of this, some more decoration so that I'm tracking what's happening. That way we won't get confused as to what's actually being executed and what we can see. All right, awesome. So now we have Docker available to us. Everything is running and executing properly. Let's start diving into some more JavaScript and Python fundamentals here. All right, so next we're going to be going over the type and type of function. Now, the type and type of function are utilized to go ahead and let us know what it is that we are holding inside of either a variable or what an actual object is. For example, here, if I do type of, and then I pass in my name, I should be able to see a string. On the left-hand side, when I pass in type, I should also be able to see a string. All right, so I'm just going to run my runner really quick. And you can see here from my JavaScript output, I am getting string. And from my Python output, I am also getting a string. I'm seeing my runner is a little bit formatted wrong. There you are. There you go. All right. Now, both of these are returning string to me. And the type of function is extremely useful whenever you're trying to check what it is that you are working with. Right? It has saved me a ton of times to just check what type it is that I'm working with. Now, in addition to just learning about the type of function, we can go ahead and start diving into some methods here. So far, we've learned about the string method. And before you think of the string method as an entire sentence, which I think is a very common analogy that people give, is that the string method is just to hold an entire sentence. And it's a little bit misleading, right? A string is not the entire word itself. A string is a collection of characters next to one another. For example, we may have something like, hey, this here is trying to say hello. Notice that even the absence of a character, such as a space, is still occupying a slot. All right, and I like to use this train analogy because strings are also something that's called an iterable data structure, meaning that I can go ahead and iterate through them. And we'll talk about iteration later on. But another really key point about iterable data structures is that they hold a concept called indexes. All right, in this example here, what we're seeing is where index 0 is holding H, index 1 is holding E, index 2, index 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. All of these indexes match with a slot of the cart, including the empty space. If I want to access a specific location inside of this string, and I know which part of this string I want to access, I could access it by the value of the index. Notice that indexes start counting from 0. This is different than what we've seen in the past. Not only are iterable data structures provide us something like index, they also provide us with something called length. And length works fundamentally different in both JavaScript and Python. They provide the same output, but the system in which they work in are different. Let's see both of these in action. All right, I already know I'm working with a string. I'm going to go ahead and do my name, and I want to see the length of my name. Why is this one snake case? Bad. No one corrected me either. You guys just let me write this in snake case instead of camels. All right. Dot length. Now, both of the strings are going to return the same. Oh, actually, they won't return the same output. Let's change our sentence here. Let's do my name is boom. And let's run that here as well. My name is, there you go. Both should return the same output. If I run runner.sh, I should be able to see 20 in both of them. But I just told you guys that it works fundamentally different under the hood. Right? They're both actually counting how many indexes are being occupied by the string, right? So that's what it means by length. They're both counting how much it is that the string is occupying. And it determined that I need 20 indexes, including index 0. But notice that in JavaScript, I'm utilizing this dot notation. And in Python, I'm utilizing this len function. What does that tell me about these two? Let's break this down. What is len? Right? Is it a property? Is it a function? If it is a function, does it take in parameters? And what does it return? So the first question, is the len function a property? Okay, I'm seeing a couple of people saying no. Why are we saying no? Why is it not a property? How do I know it's a function to begin with? Let's pass this question off to Patty. Patty, how do I know that len is a function?
Sorry, I was trying to get my cursor to get over there. So a function is like a built-in way of assigning a rule in Python or JavaScript. So it's like already pre-built into the concept. I think I'm wording that right.
I think you're trying to tell me that this is a pre-built function, which is true.
Yeah.
This is a pre-built function, but how do I know that this is a function? What about this syntax tells me this is a function?
Because it's the way it's placed. It's in the parentheses. So it is gonna, so I can't word it right. But anyway, so because there's a parentheses in front of it, the len is the next part of the sentence. So the len is gonna cause the print to it's the function of print, basically. So it's gonna make print do its job, basically. Did I word that right? I don't think I worded that right.
I don't think so. No, let me give Josh a try on this one. He has his hand
Yeah,
up. Go
I'm
for it,
really bad at
Josh.
wording it.
Because it has to take an argument after the length.
Okay, nice. So we took in an argument. So that answered my other question. It does take in a parameter, right? It takes in one parameter. The argument that I'm passing in is of my name. We know that len is a function because of these parentheses that are to the right of it, right? We are calling a function, we're passing in an argument, and we're expecting it to return an integer. Nice. But in main.js, this looks completely different. In main.js, this is not a function. I'm accessing something through dot notation. Typically, dot notation belongs to an object, right? Where we do something like object dot key, and that returns the value. But in this case, this isn't an object. This is a string. So what's going on here? I'm gonna pass it to Abdel for this one, Josh.
My bad, Josh. Because everything in JavaScript is an object, so it inherits that property from the object parent.
Nice. So everything in JavaScript, like we talked about earlier, under the hood is actually an object, right? So the string object, which holds a bunch of key value pairs, holds a key named length, This is also known as a property of length that will return the amount of indexes held by the string, which in this case it's 20. All right, so very important thing to analyze. Length in JavaScript is a property. Len in Python is a function, right? They both provide the same output and they're very similar to one another, but under the hood, they function and are accessed differently. All right. Now, strings. Strings are very important because strings are actually immutable data structures, meaning they cannot be changed. If I wanted to change this to something like my name is, and then something else, I would have to actually generate a brand new string to be able to do that. All right. For example, if I try to say, hey, my name is, and just change this last portion, so access the index and change it, I should get an error. Let's take a look at this. Let's go into my name, add index, and I'm just going to do these very first ones to do his name is, right? So I'm going to do 0, which is now going to be equal to an H. We can already see this is highlighted in red. All right, let's see why that is. Oh, and this is also inside the print statement, which is not a good idea because I'm trying to do assignment inside of a print statement. All right. And let's do the same thing here in JavaScript. All right, so I'm going to hold my name at index 0. I'm going to make it equal to NH. All right, so both of them definitely return some unexpected output, all right? JavaScript did not return an error, but notice it didn't change the value of index 0. The value of index 0 stayed as my name is, even though I'm clearly trying to assign. Well, that's because it's immutable. So JavaScript essentially said, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm just going to ignore that and kept running, right? Where Python said, all right, well, you have to know what you're talking about. So now we have a problem. Hey, you can't do assignment to a string. All right, a string does not support item assignment because a string is immutable. All right, so both of them failed to function the way I expected. I couldn't actually change the value. I would have to recreate an entire new string. Right, so I could do something like my name too, and I could make this to his name. All right, so his, and then plus my name. Again, we could do my name too. Make this equal to his plus my name. And this should actually not look very nice once we see it. But this is going to lead us into slicing. So please bear with me. All right. And now we can see that a brand new copy was created, right? My name too is not the same thing as my name. These are two completely different copies that were created of a string. Go for it, Dom.
For your my name two and your main.js, don't you need a let there for that variable?
Yes, I do. Thank you for catching that. Appreciate it. Yeah, so Dom is saying here on line 3, we should have a let. All right, awesome. So now let's go ahead and keep going here. I know that this is what I am holding, right? I am holding these strings, but currently they're not working the way I want them to. I actually want this to be a replacement to say, hey, from after the letter Y, moving forward, I want to copy my name. This is called string slicing. I want to slice my string and determine the index at which I would like to start. So this is index 0. This is index 1. Here's the first one that I want to retain. That is index 2. And I want it to go all the way to the end. So because I want it to go all the way to the end, I don't have to add a secondary parameter. I'll do the same thing on the right-hand side. I'll say dot slice. And what I want to do is go from the start all the way till the end. Let's go ahead and run this. And now you can see that we're getting his name is Francisco and his name is Francisco. Now the slicing method, again, the syntax is a little bit different. All right. Here in Python, we're slicing utilizing square brackets with a colon to reference a range. I want to grab a copy from index, etc., to index, etc. In JavaScript, I have to actually utilize a method named slice. Slice is a string method that takes in the same number of parameters, right? It takes in where I want to start from to where I want to end at. All right. Any questions regarding slicing or string concatenation? All right. If no one has any questions regarding slicing or string concatenation, let's go ahead and take a look at a couple of references here. There is no feasible universe in which you're going to learn every single string method that exists in JavaScript. And regardless of what anybody tells you, I don't think there's a single developer out there that actually memorizes every single one of these methods. So it's important to be able to reference documentation. I myself really like W3 schools to be able to take a look at documentation and be able to learn about methods, how to use them, etc. All right. Here, I can actually figure out where a character is located. So for example, I can specify, hey, I want to know what character is at index 0. And I could find out that at index 0, the letter H is located there. I could come up. You could see there are some substrings that we could take a look for. I could specify the substring that I'm looking for. You can see that substr is similar to slice. Okay, nice. And it gives you some pretty nice warnings as to things to keep in mind. So it tells you, hey, this method is now deprecated as well. So it's not necessarily something that you should be utilizing. You should just use slice instead. All right, there's a couple of other ones. I strongly recommend checking these out. They are inside of our curriculum. And if you're working through an algorithm, just have these methods pulled up on the side. Know what you're working with. If you're working with strings, these are all the string methods available. If you're working with something like arrays or numbers, let's say that. All right, you can take a look at numbers, and that takes you straight to some number methods that you can take a look at inside of JavaScript, and so on, right? Depending on what data type you're working with, there's always going to be something that specifies methods that are available. Here's some JavaScript objects, all right? You can take a look at methods to tackle down, understand what kind of methods you can do or interact with to be able to grab what you're looking for. All right. Any questions regarding strings before we keep pushing? Okay, fantastic. In that case, let's go ahead and dive straight into some numbers, everybody.
I have a question.
Oh, send it, Ronnie.
Are we gonna go over F strings as well and like how to use them or no?
Yeah, let's go and talk about that.
Okay.
Right? Let's talk about some string interpolation here. So here what I'm doing is something called string concatenation, which is great, right? I can go ahead and essentially add two strings together to make them do what I want or to make the output that I desire. But there is something called string interpolation, where essentially I am inserting a variable into a string. Let's call this my example. Or yeah, let's do my example. And let's do the number in the variable is, And in here, we're going to go ahead and insert a value called num. All right. And then I'm going to do num, which is equal to 8. Now, what is this doing? What am I looking at here? I have a regular string, but I do have this f in the very front. Why? All right. Well, this is signifying that this is an interpolated string. It's telling Python to be prepared to insert a value straight into the string. While I'm writing this out, in curly brackets, this is the Python code that needs to be executed and inserted straight into the string. We could actually do the same thing inside of JavaScript. All right, we could have let num be equal to 8. We could say let my example be equal to an interpolated string. And in JavaScript, it's actually a different format. In here, we're going to have some backticks. And we're going to say the number in var is, and same thing, we'll call curly brackets, call num. But in front of these curly brackets, we're actually going to call a $sign. And that's what will get us our string pulled up there. All right, so you can see there we have the number is var. We have some backticks. We're utilizing the $sign with curly brackets to signify this is the insertion of JavaScript code. And here we have an f at the very beginning of the string, and then curly brackets to signify this is the insertion of Python code. So let's go ahead and take a look at my example and go for it, Josh.
That was it. You fixed it.
Perfect. All right, and let's take a look at my example. All right, we run these runners. And there you can see the number in the var is 8. The number in var is 8. We don't have to just insert variables. We could actually do code in here. We could multiply it times 4. Same thing in JavaScript. We could multiply it times 4. We're going to get into mathematical operators here in a little bit. And there you can see that it's actually going to return 32. All right. Any questions over string interpolation? Is there anything anybody would like to see with the string before we keep pushing into numbers? Let's hear it, Abdel.
I think raw strings would be helpful to like escape and stuff.
Oh, okay. Mm,
I don't think you really use raw strings that much unless you're dealing with regex.
I could definitely show it, but I gotta advise everybody, this is probably gonna go over your head. Uh, if you don't mind, Abdel, can we save that one until after the end of lecture,
Yeah,
once we're done with all topics? Okay,
perfectly fine. Yep.
awesome. All right. So now we have JavaScript going on. We have Python ready to go. We've covered strings, and we're ready to dive into some numbers. I'm going to go ahead and comment all this out so that we don't actually get inflated with all this code. Well, let's start talking about some numbers. All right, now numbers in Python are anything that are whole digits, and they are referenced in Python as integers. In JavaScript, they're referenced to as numbers. And funnily enough, in JavaScript, a number is a number, regardless whether it is a whole integer or not. Let's go ahead and console.log. And I totally forgot to add my let there. Oh. Num. And let's do type of num. And then here we'll go ahead and print type num. When we execute this, you're going to see that in JavaScript, this is referenced to as a number. In Python, this is referenced to as an integer. But where it really gets weird is once I add these decimal points. If I make them into 0.5s, then all of a sudden in JavaScript, I still keep this number, but in Python, this is known as a float. So please make sure you keep that in mind. In Python, anything that holds a decimal moving forward is called a floating number or a floating integer. In JavaScript, everything is interpreted as a number. All right. Now, numbers are just represent. Oh, go for it, Don.
Sorry, I'm not trying to derail this at all, but just trying to understand in your console now, is this because the Docker is running? There's like all this extra stuff before you were getting the output, and I'm just a little confused by that.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And yes, this is just essentially my Docker images being built, right? So this is building my JavaScript image.
Every time you're sending a command through, it's going to run all of that, all of that.
Yeah, and that is because, and this is not derailing the lecture at all. Let me see here. So that is because when we talked about containers yesterday, where are we at? Here we go. And I make a copy of this file. This copy of the file is happening at the image level, right? So if I change the contents of the file and then try to run the container doesn't know anything about those changes unless I rebuild the image. So I have to rebuild the entire image and then run the container.
Okay, can I ask one follow-up then? I'm sorry.
Yeah,
So Um, it just seems logical to me then that you would only set up Docker when you were like done and ready to push and share if you're building on your local machine versus like right now it's just on your machine, right? So like when it's done at the end, I'm just trying to understand why you're using Docker right now.
yeah, that's a great question. And the only reason why we're utilizing Docker right now is quite literally for rinse and repeat, right? I want everybody to fully understand how to utilize Docker, to be comfortable with the Docker technology. Docker is more for once you're building applications and have a tech stack, right? Then we could set up dependencies, and there's not necessarily a refresh of building the image from scratch every single time. It's just that right now, because of where we're at, we need to do it this way.
Super helpful. I think I was just thinking like, are you asked, or should we be running these Dockers like when we're just on our own local machine now, or like do so that's helpful clarification. Thank you.
Of course. Nice. All right. So there we go. We got our numbers. We were able to see them printed out and we checked their types. Now let's actually talk about some operations here. All right. Now, numbers are not extremely complicated. We can do pretty much everything that we do inside of regular mathematics, if not even more. All right. So, for example, we can multiply our numbers. We saw this already. We do multiplication with the asterisk symbol. I believe that's what's called, right? The asterisk symbol. Pretty sure, right? And once this is ran, this is actually going to show us what it's like when it's multiplied by 2, right? So there's 16. We can also do division. We can divide by 2. We can do multiplication to the power. And so we could do nums to the power of 2. There's also addition that can take place. And there's, of course, subtraction that can take place. Let's go ahead and take these over here as well. Try to take a keyboard shortcut and ended up just making it even worse. All right. So there's all the different types of operators that we can do there. We can see that they work fundamentally the same, right? So there's our multiplication at the very top. We have our division. Notice that in Python, whenever we divide it by 2, we got this 4.0, right? This point oh means that we're dealing with a floating number, not with an integer. All right. When we did to the power, we get 64. When we do addition, we get 10. When we do subtraction, we get 6. But now I'm running into a little bit of weirdness, right? Why is this a floating integer now and not returning an integer number? Well, when you do division, you're not always going to get back a whole number. All right, Python knows this, so it tries to account for it. So how do I fix this? Well, we fix this utilizing something called floor division. And that's just adding 2 slashes there. All right, in the JavaScript side, you're not really going to see a difference, but you will definitely see, oh, we can't do that in JavaScript. We'll talk about the math operator later on. All right. Now, the floor operator is what actually gets you your integer of 4. All right. Any questions regarding numbers? Is there anything we would like to see? How did it even execute this? Okay, if there's nothing we would like to see, there is a very common issue that I would like to explain, and that's something like identifying if a number is even or not. This is done through modulo. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and print even or not. This is done through modulo. This is by taking a number and figuring out the remainder given by 2. When I run this should give me 0. All right, so for even or not, when I've tried to figure out the remainder by 2, this is giving me 0. That is because 8 divided by 2 goes into it 4 times, and there is no remainder available. But what happens when I change this to something like 9? What would be the remainder of 9 divided by 2? Anybody?
1.
There it is. We'll have 1, all right? When I execute this, I'll get 1. And this is letting me know that this is not even, right? If there is a remainder, that is telling me we are dealing with an odd number. And if there is not a remainder, then I am dealing with an even number. I'm going over this specifically because this is a very common trend that you're going to see in a lot of algorithms. Go for it, Adele.
Does that one account for zeros and ones as well? Would it?
Oh, that's a great question. Like, is this even? Does this account for zeros and ones, right? Well, let's try it out. All right, let's do 0, and let's pass it out over here. Let's do 0, and let's see what it does. Well, 0 modulo 0. Well, technically, that's telling me that 0 is even, all right? But actually, 0 is odd. So make sure that you take that into consideration when you're working through this, right? Don't count for 0. An easy way to account for that is make sure that whenever you're counting or whatever iteration you're working through does not start at 0, unless specifically dictated to otherwise. All right, and the same thing could be said for 1. Well, 1 is odd, and I'm pretty sure this is going to return to us odd, but just in case, let's check it out. Yeah, so here we're getting 1, letting us know that it is odd. All right. Awesome, everyone. So now we're done with numbers. Let's go ahead and start talking about some Booleans here. I totally forgot to show you guys my handy dandy image of all my numbers, but it's not too late. Here we go. Here's all my numbers. Huh? Well, we already covered that, so I'm just going to go ahead and dump it here. We were able to do all of that. And now we can go ahead and talk about true or false. Now, true or false is it's pretty simple. It quite literally means, hey, is this true or is it not? All right. And it is determined inside of both Python and JavaScript with the keywords of true or false. So here, if I go ahead and say, I'm just going to call this lever. I'm going to name it to true. And then I'm going to name this one lever. And I'm going to set it to true. There is a little bit of a difference there, right? Whenever I write them out in Python, there is a capital T. In JavaScript, we have a lowercase t. Let's go ahead and take a look at the type here so we can ensure that we're working with the appropriate type. You can see that we're working with a Boolean in both Python and JavaScript. All right, so that's good. I'm able to see it. I can see that in JavaScript, it's depicted with a lowercase letter. In Python, it's depicted with an uppercase letter. I can go ahead and switch this to false. And this will also give me back just a Boolean as well. All right. Now, these switches are very good to be able to have whenever you're interacting, whether you're trying to evaluate if a condition is being met or not. All right. And here's a quick example of that. Let's go ahead and say that I have a string and I want my string. Let's bring back a string. And this is just a string. We're going to do the same thing here on the right-hand side. We're going to have let a string be equal to just a string. I'm getting my JavaScript and Python all kinds of messed up here. All right. And all I want to do is I want to find out if just the string holds more than 5 spaces. All right. If its length is more than 5. Well, I could do so this way. I could print if a string or the length of a string is greater than 5. Same thing here. I could go ahead and console.log if a string dot length is greater than 5. When I run these, I should be able to see true for both of them, right? If I run less than, I should be able to see false for both of them. Right? I could even ask if they hold the same length, which in this case, we should see that being false. Right? You could see double equals is asking for equality. But in JavaScript, double equals doesn't actually ask for equality. Right? It asks for type equality, not strict equality. Moving forward, always utilize the triple equal sign whenever it comes to asking for equality inside of JavaScript. All right. Does anyone have any questions regarding comparison operators or truthy or falsy statements? Let's hear it, Don.
Could you just say that one more time what the double equals for Java is again?
Yeah, so double equals for JavaScript is not asking for strict equality. It only compares type comparison. So it does either type or value comparison. Let me do a
It
quick
does value.
Oh, there you go. Let me do a quick example of that, right? So let's say I'm just going to do EX. I'm going to make this, I don't even need a variable. I don't know why I'm doing that. Let's do this number. All right, so here I have the string of 5 and I have the number of 5. And let's go ahead and do the runner. All right, so here I'm getting false. I'm utilizing a triple equal sign. That's what I expected. All right, I am dealing with a string, and a string is not the same as an integer. So I expected that failure. And I need a little bit of a brighter color here. All right. Well, if I run the double equal sign and I run this, notice it comes back as true. Right? It is doing that because it's only analyzing the value of 5 and not taking into consideration the type. So that's why we ask you all to utilize the triple equals instead of double equals. Does that answer your question, Dom? I see the thumbs up. Awesome.
Thank you.
Of course. All right. Any other questions? Oh. All right. If no one has any questions, then it's time for us to start talking about none and null. Both of these values are utilized to represent emptiness. Right? I can go ahead and make a value called empty and call this none. If I print this with a type to take a look at what's returned, we'll see what actually comes back here shortly. Let's let empty be equal to null. And let's console.log the type of empty. All right, when we execute this, we can see that we're getting an object. And down below for Python, we're getting a class of none type. These are representing nothing, right? These are purpose emptiness. There is nothing inside of this variable. Now, none is utilized mainly for something that's going to be filled in later on. Let's say you want to make a dummy variable and then later on you want to switch its value, but you know you're going to need it. You could always set it to null. All right. A good thing to do in web applications is, hey, if the user is currently null, then I want you to take them to the login page. Right? And then otherwise, I want you to take them to the home page. That's some good logic for some sort of user interface there. Now, here's where it gets a little bit tricky. In JavaScript, there is such a thing as undefined. So the way I could think about this is by giving you all an example where we have these glasses of water. Know that some of these glasses of water hold values inside of them. And these values could be whatever we want, right? We could say, hey, this is an S for a string. Whoa. This is an S for a string. This is an integer. This is holding an array. Here we have an object. Here's another integer. Oh, and that's not what I meant to do. And that's it, right? So the glasses that hold water inside of them, they actually have a value. Notice these glasses are holding a value. Well, what about these two? These glasses don't have any water inside of them. They are completely empty. This here is the representation of null. Right? This is saying, hey, we are purposely setting an empty value into null. And then we have something that's completely missing. This is the representation of undefined. All right. Something completely missing is undefined. A purposeful emptiness is null. All right? And that's the best way that I could go about describing that. So if we can go ahead and take a look at that here. We've already seen undefined. I could say never created, and leave it there. And if I take a look at never created, I should be able to see undefined. All right.
Get away. What are you doing? No, go away.
I'm not doing anything. What are you doing? All right. Awesome. Any questions regarding null, none, or undefined? Okay, this one's actually really important for me, so I'm gonna go ahead and ask it a third time. Oh, go for it, Don.
Sorry to have so many questions today. Just to clarify, so because Python uses the equal sign to set the variable, you couldn't say there's no undefined because you couldn't say variable equal nothing. It's just empty, right? That's why is that I'm just trying to get to the make it make sense in my head for no undefined in Python. It makes sense, makes perfect sense in JavaScript. Like, hey, we just didn't, give anything to this at all. It could be a fruit instead of a glass in that empty shelf there.
Yeah, so when it comes down to it, it's just the way that those languages were built. It's not necessarily about syntax, is that JavaScript wanted to be flexible, so it allowed for there to be such a thing as undefined. That way people can keep like running and programming and dealing with it, right? Where Python was not, right? Python just said, hey, you either have to make this empty or give it something, but you're not just gonna leave something without any sort of meaning. Does that make sense, Don? Nice. All right. Awesome, everyone. Let me go ahead and take a look at our handy dandy README. We are done with all of our primitive types, it looks like. And now we're down to complex data types. Now, before we dive into some complex data, actually, let's dive right into them. All right, we might be able to. Nope, no. All right, let's go ahead and actually stop our lecture here. I'm gonna go ahead and pause the recording. All right, welcome back, everyone. Now we're going to go ahead and continue our lecture by talking about arrays and list. Now, arrays and list are very similar to how strings work. They are also iterable data structures. They also hold indexes, just like strings do. But the biggest difference between arrays or list and strings is that they don't just hold a collection of characters. They actually hold pretty much anything. They could hold a value or a variable, or excuse me, they could hold a value such as a string. They can hold things like a number, hold Boolean variables such as true. They may even hold other complex data types like an array or an object. Right? They may have some nested values in there. We may be looking into some, let's see, what else is there? I think that's pretty much everything that we've seen here. Let's do some none. And let's throw in a false in there right the way. All right. So here we have our nice handy dandy array that's able to hold a collection, right? It is a collection, not of just characters formatted as string, but it is a collection of many different data types. Let's take a look at that inside of our JavaScript and Python. Now, in JavaScript, these are called arrays, which again, these are a collection of different data types. Let's call this my array. And this could hold something like, hey, we have fruits, we have true, and we have the number 8. The same thing could be applied here. This is a collection of different data types, but they are not called arrays. They're called list. We can go ahead and print the type. And we could go ahead and console.log the type of. All right, when we run this, it can get a little bit confusing because, well, in JavaScript, I'm seeing object. In Python, I'm seeing a list. Well, this is very confusing, right? Python, I'm getting back what I expected. I expected to see a list. But when it comes to JavaScript, I definitely didn't expect to see object. That's confusing to me. Go for it, Kenny. We can't hear you.
Testing, is that better?
Yeah, now we can.
Sorry about that. I was I was gonna ask, is that just because JavaScript considers everything an object? So it's just like here's your type, it's an object.
Yeah, especially when it comes to complex data types, right? Complex data types are interpreted as an object. So this is kind of where we start using some of the functionality for type of, right? Because type of is quite literally telling us what the type is. It is an object, but I want to know what kind of object is this? Well, in this case, what we can do is we could call the data type of array and ask, hey, is this an array? And now we should get back something like true, right? If I were to change back or change this into something like a string, just gonna put some gibberish in there, I would expect that to return false. Now we could see false being annotated there in the output in my terminal. All right. All right. Awesome. So now I'm able to understand that this is an array. And arrays are fantastic because they do grant me a little bit of direct or immediate access to places. Now, we talked about this when we were interacting with strings. Immediate access is granted through what process? How can I actually acquire immediate access? Right? So, for example, let's say I wanted the number 8. How could I get the number 8 immediately without having to search through this array or do any sort of craziness inside of this array? All right, let's hear it, Albert.
Would you call out the index of my array?
Nice. Yeah, I could call the index. I could say, hey, my list at index 2. And I can also call my array at index 2. And when we execute this, we're going to see that both of them return the value of the number 8. All right. This is accessing direct access. And for those of you who may be interested in data structures and algorithms, this is an actual O of 1 operation, meaning it is instant operations. All right, so talking about efficiency, this is pretty much as efficient as it gets. Now, this is the accessing of a value, not the searching of a value. All right, there are a ton of array methods. So many that we probably won't be able to cover them inside of this small lecture that we're doing today. But what we can do is we can actually slice, which is very similar to what we saw We can go ahead and grab from index 1 and go to the end. We can also slice here. We can slice from index 1 to the end. That should return both true and 8 for both JavaScript and Python. You can see that's returning true and 8. All right, so this is the method of slicing. I can actually add elements into an array. All right, I can go ahead and say, hey, my array dot push, and I can push here something that says new. We can do the same thing here. We can go into my list and append new. Now, this is simply just adding the brand new entry of new to the very end of our array or list. All right. Any questions regarding arrays? Let's hear it, James.
I see that you're using single quotes for the array and list, and then double quotes in the append push and single quotes. Is there a best practice? Should we keep them consistent where we use double quotes
Yeah, that's a
for
fantastic question.
strings?
That's an awesome question. Yeah, when it comes to strings, I almost always suggest utilizing double strings or double quotes for your strings rather than single quotes. And my reasoning for that is here, right? So let's say I want to do something like they are fruits. When I run this, I should get an error inside of Python where the Python is telling me, hey, you have an unterminated string literal detected on line 3. And that's happening right here. I'm starting a brand new string and I'm never ending it. It doesn't have any idea of what is going on there. Go for it, Kenny.
Is that because when it reads the string, it looks at the word like if they is one word and then RE fruits was never closed off.
Yeah.
So that's why you use like I I think it's forward slash, not backslash. To you're telling with the slash, you're telling the function, hey, look, this is not a cutoff. This is part of the string,
Yeah, so it's actually
if I
just
remember
called
correctly.
it's just called a escape character. Yeah, but that's exactly it, right? So we're starting a string and we're ending a string. Now this is grammar, right? If I would have utilized double quotes, this wouldn't be an issue. All right, I can go to double quotes. And now it says, hey, we're starting a string here and we're ending a string here. There's no issue, right? So double quotes is always the preferred way for being able to write a string, or I'm always going to advocate for it. If you are, for whatever reason, adamant of utilizing a singular string, just like Kenny said, we could use an escape character, which in this case, it's a backslash, not a forward slash, that would escape. All right. Now, when I execute this, you'll get there are fruits. You'll see that that backtick is not demonstrated in here, right? That is because I'm asking it to utilize it as an escape character. But if I do the whole double quotes, there's no need for an escape character at all. Did that answer your question, James?
Yeah, yeah. In terms of best practice, so it for the backslash, is it just a matter of preference between developers then if they prefer to use it, or is there actual reasoning behind why they would prefer using the single quote with the backslash?
No, I don't think there's any sort of reasoning behind it. It's just what they would prefer. I can promise you that if it requires any sort of apostrophe in it, they're likely utilizing double quotes, and not using the backslash because backslashes are kind of a pain to have to deal with. Um, the only time where I could see it being a requirement is if you're writing something like a bash script, right? Bash scripts would require something like escape characters being included inside of the string, but that's outside of the languages that we're learning right now.
Gotcha. Thank you.
of course. All right, fantastic. So now we have our array. We're able to grab indexes from the array. We're able to add from the array. What about removing from the array? Well, we can do something like pop. And pop just takes in an index of what I want to remove. I can remove index 1. And let's see, in Python, I believe we have remove, reduce, reverse. Nope, that ain't it. Is it pop also? It is also pop. All right, let's try that. And let's see what they do. All right, we execute my array.pop. And now we can see that that middle index was removed. All right, we are removing index 1, which holds true from the array. All right, any other questions regarding arrays? Okay, awesome. In that case, that takes us to our more complicated data structure, which are objects. Now, objects and or dictionaries, so these are going to be called objects in JavaScript and dictionaries in Python. They go by the reference of key value pairs. And the best way I could go about describing these is kind of like a locker room, all right, or a bunch of lockers. Let me see if I could find my nice handy drawing here. All right. So inside of an object, we are going to be holding a ridiculous amount of values. But all of these values hold only one particular key. In order to be able to open any single one of these doors that we are seeing here, so if I wanted to open this door, I would have to have the key that matches this door and be able to access this value. All right? That's essentially what a dictionary or an object is. Let's see it in practice. I'm going to quickly make a dictionary. Let's call this one user. And this user is going to have an email, which is going to be fr@fr.com. And it is going to have a password, which for simplicity's sake, we'll go ahead and make it fr. Do the same thing inside of JavaScript. We'll do this whole let user be equal to an object. We'll have email, which is fr@fr.com. We're going to have a password where the password will be fr. All right. And then I'm just doing a little bit of formatting for my object. This isn't like a requirement, but I personally like to see it this way. All right, so now we can go ahead and make sure that this is an object. In JavaScript, we had an is array, so I wonder if there's an is object. Let's check that out. Is object in JavaScript. So JavaScript does not have a built-in each object method if it values a plain object. Because type of unexpectedly returns object, and okay. To reliably verify if an object, oh man, this is a lot. Oh, there you go. We have object is. Oh, let's see, false. Nope, that's not it. Here we go. So here we can reliably verify if this is an object by asking, hey, is this an object? Passing in the object literal, and then passing in an object next to it, which doesn't seem like a very good, efficient way. I wonder if this is the same thing. Yeah, it doesn't seem like there's a better way to doing that than this. That's unfortunate, right? But let's see it. All right, we're going to go ahead and console.log. Here, I'm going to pass in the object is. I'm making sure that my user is an actual JavaScript object. And this is going to return either true or false. And in here, I can just go ahead and print type of user. When I return both of these, I get false, which is unexpected. I definitely expected that to return true. And I'm getting a class of dictionary. Interesting. Why is this returning false? Yeah, it looks like checking if something is an object in JavaScript may be more of a pain than what we thought. Let's see a different article here. So we know the type of operator isn't going to do the trick. I see. So first it checks if it is an object, then it makes sure it's not an array, and makes sure it's not a regular expression. Wow. Hmm. Yeah, definitely a lot of the extra steps to be able to check if something is an object. All right. Well, we know we're dealing with an object. We can see these curly brackets telling us this is an object, and we have our key value pairs there, where our keys are on the left-hand side, and our values are on the right-hand side. These are our key value pairs. Excuse me. If I wanted to grab something from user, let's say I wanted to grab my user's email, I can go ahead and call user email. And same thing inside of JavaScript, I can go ahead and call user email. And you'll see that both of these work the same. And I see a hand up. Go ahead, Kenny.
Is it just good practice to have the print opened up the same way the value pairs is, or is it okay to still have it collapse down like the way we did length earlier?
I am confused as to your question. Are you asking in line 7 through 9?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so this one doesn't, it's really whatever you prefer. I like to keep things nice and short. So if they start elongating too much, I just collapse them and open them up so that it occupies less of my screen. But the functionality doesn't change regardless of what syntax you would like to use. Does that answer your question, Kenny?
Yes, sis.
Okay, nice. All right. So you can see here that I'm accessing a key, the key of email, by passing it in square brackets, kind of the same way that I'm accessing index to be able to return a value from my object. Nice. But there's a couple of differences here. What happens if I look for something like first name? What do we think this is going to do this year, Kenny?
Since we haven't added that as a set, like we haven't defined that in any way, we should get an error back. Uh, at the very least, I think undefined for JavaScript.
Okay, so undefined for JavaScript and an error for Python. Let's see that. Right, when we execute this, we actually do get exactly that. We get undefined for JavaScript and an error for Python. Now, this isn't necessarily a good thing, all right? We like the strictness, but at the same time, I'm not always going to know what keys are available inside of an object. Sometimes I may want to check, hey, it could be under first name, or maybe it's under first camel case name, right? There's two different conventions that I could be looking for. Well, how do I fix this? Right, how do I make sure that my code doesn't break when I'm grabbing a key from a dictionary inside of Python? Does anyone have any ideas? Let's hear it, Mohammed.
Use the dot get method.
Yeah, nice. So we use the .get method. All right, we're gonna go ahead and do .get. And now, instead of getting an error, I should be seeing none because it doesn't exist inside of my object. Fantastic. All right, so now the .get method is a good way to be able to access keys, and I strongly suggest that moving forward, you don't use square brackets, you use the .get method in Python. Well, what other differences is there and objects. Well, there's also a difference in the declaration of keys. I can declare a key in JavaScript without having any sort of quotation marks. And this will still work exactly the same. If I change this for, I don't know, let's say email, or let's change it for password since we already saw email. You'll see that both of them come out with the same exact outcome. Right? The quotation marks around keys are optional in JavaScript and only in JavaScript. Another place where they differ is I don't have to access keys through square brackets in JavaScript. I can use dot notation, very much how a string holds the dot length, right? This is the dot length property that belongs to a string. The user holds a property named password, and I could access it through dot notation. And both of them will return the same exact outcome. All right. So, oh, I see a hand up. Go ahead, Dom.
Since the keys don't have parentheses around them, or that they're not strings here in JavaScript like this, what are they?
Yeah, it's a good question, right? What are these being defined as? How does this actually fall? Um, oh man, there's no easy way to answer this. They're essentially being built into the program where user is now a representation of a class, and the class has something called properties and methods, right? Email is not just a string, it's essentially a variable that holds the value of fr and fr. Does that answer your question, Dom?
Yes, thank you.
Of course. Kenny?
Mohammed had his hand up first.
I don't think Mohammed ever put his hand down from a previous question, but good looking out. Do you still have a question?
Um, I was just trying to think of it a different way. Once we drop the quotation, would it kind of work like if it invisibly had the constant feature?
No.
Okay.
All right, awesome. Okay, so now we have our object, right? And we have our dictionary. But what if we wanted to add some things into it? What if we wanted to add first name, right? I want to make sure that, hey, for this first name, I can go ahead and add Francisco. We know we want some sort of assignment, right? But what would be the convention for being able to write this out? Well, I know I'm adding it to user. How do I actually add Francisco? Because this is just replacing the entire variable of user for a string, right? So I'm dumping the object. How do I fix this so that I'm adding into the object? Let's hear it, Josh.
Use your square brackets to declare what the value is going to be or the key is going to be.
Nice. So let's go ahead and add name. And we can add name. And now when this gets executed, we can see Francisco. Or I could even subtract all of this and just actually see the entire user object. And I'm going to see all the keys to include the name key at the very end. All right. Well, it's not common use to actually expose the user's password. So how do I remove the password from this object or dictionary? I'm gonna pass this question to somebody I haven't heard of from today. Let's hear it, Jason. How do I delete an entry from an object or dictionary. You're not muted on Zoom, but you're muted somewhere else. I'm assuming a mic.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, it was on my headset. Sorry about that. So I'm thinking maybe using pop on there, like pull it out of the dictionary itself. Could you do that?
Okay, so pop, that's a very good way to look at it, right? Well,
Yeah.
pop only accesses inside of a list or an array. So
Mhm.
pop isn't the best way to do it in this case because we're dealing with a dictionary on object.
Oh man, let me look at how do we let's see how to do this here. Would you use remove? Right.
Nice. So in this case, we're actually
Ah,
looking for the DEL keyword, right, which stands for delete. So here we're going to delete user password.
mhm.
And then inside of Python, we'll go ahead and delete user password. And now we should only see the email and name without that password key. All right. Any questions up to this point? Okay. No questions. In that case, that's going to take us into our next exercise here, where I'm going to actually grab an output from the Poke API. Just going to grab this entire dictionary here. And let's make this into a big screen. What is it that you're not liking? Let's see. Oof, this is a little bit bigger than what I was expecting. Let's do it this way. We're looking here at the Poke API. And in here, I would like you all to walk me through the process of being able to find the actual. Let's take a look here. I want you guys to walk me through the process of being able to find a move name, the second move name of every Pokemon. How can I do that? All right, let's take a look at Charizard. And I want to find the second move name of Charizard. Let me see. Let me pass it off to Simon. How would I get there? I'll collapse all of these so we can get a little bit of a better visual. And you don't have to take me there all the way. You could just give me one step.
Are you talking about programmatically, or are you talking about just actually walking you through finding it on this?
Let's do you walk me through finding it on this, and then I'll give it to somebody else to help me do it programmatically.
Okay. All right. So, I mean, you've already got the Charizard name up there. So then you would look down at the resources and you would scroll through until you found you were looking for moves, right?
Okay, nice. So I
So
find
then you'd
moves.
click on the moves, and then so that would be the first layer of your dictionary.
Hmm.
Then you'd have to go into the next layer to looking for the second move, correct?
Right.
Must be- So then you'd have to find the second move. So that'd be the first index of the next
Okay, so
dictionary,
here's
if you will.
index one. Nice.
So you'd be, if you're looking at that programmatically, it would be Charizard would be the name of the dictionary. Resources would be no, moves would be the first layer,
Okay, so we go into moves. Nice.
and then you would go into the next layer. The next bracket would be number one, because it'd be
Index.
index one,
Okay, because that represents the second move. Nice.
right?
And then
And
how do we grab the
then
name?
name of that. So if you want the value, a variable key. Oh, that's the to grab the name, object name key.
Well, let's take a look at it.
Oh,
All right, let's see what we have so
it,
far.
okay. Python, it looks like it would be is that the dot get, or is that you'd use? I mean, but that could be also if there isn't anything in there, but that's, I guess I'm not
Yeah,
putting the connection together.
let me see here. Let me actually take a look at it. Okay. All right, and we said we were taking a look at response. Let's go ahead and see what that does. Okay, so that's not letting me grab request. Oh, I know why. This is turning into a little bit more of an ambitious activity than what I intended. I apologize, everybody. Let's see, pip install request. Huh. All right, give me 4 minutes so I can get this up and running, and then we'll come back and continue the activity, everyone. So currently right now is 11:36. Let's reconvene at 11:40. All right, so let's see. We're currently back. We're dealing with this API. We're sending our request, and now we're getting back our response. As of now, our response is the entire object. But Simon, he walked us through the process of understanding that what we needed to access is moves at index one. Well, now let's run this. Well, moves at index one is still returning quite a bit of information. We see here we have a move with a URL. We have some version details with a lot of info inside of version details. And then we finally end. But there's three keys. We have move, URL, and version group details. So what would be next up to this point, Simon?
Okay, so the that second bracket one got you into index one, which would be moves, right? So then would you do zero, a bracket zero after that? Because I didn't realize there was a third layer there.
Okay, let's try that out. Let's see. When we run this with a bracket 0, well, that's giving me an error. Yeah. Let's see here. Let's try that again. All right, so we run it, we get back. Currently, what we're interacting with, let's actually take a look at what this is, right? Let's check out the type. We run it. We can see that what we're dealing with is a dictionary, right? And I could even check what keys are inside of this dictionary. Let's see. Let's take a look at the keys that are available within this dictionary. Well, this dictionary only holds this through these two keys. It's holding move and version control, or excuse me, and version group details. All right, so those are the only two keys that are available to me. So knowing that, where would I go next?
About dot get
Uh,
move. I'm sorry.
oh, you're good. I'll
Okay,
phone a friend.
nice. Yeah. Well, he phoned himself. Let's do dot get move. Let's run that runner. All right. And that gives us back another dictionary that now only holds the name and the URL. So we're almost there. We're almost at the very end. Let's hear it, Kenny.
I was thinking where the first moves is at to do another bracket where it says name. So that way when we do the trying to pull our second move, we will get fire punch instead of all this extra info.
You're saying here?
Yes. Like we keep the moves and then do another set of square brackets just at the end of it
Okay.
within the moves block. And I was thinking name there since that's one of the two keys that we got.
Like this?
Yes, that's what I had thought.
Let's try it out. Let's see. We run it, and it looks like we got an issue there. All right. So the response is an object, and what we're trying to access here is a key. So I don't think we could do this name right there, right? We want to access the key of moves. That gives me back an array, or excuse me, a list. I want to access index one, which gives me back an object, or excuse me, a dictionary. Then I grab the key of move, which gives me back a dictionary. And now I'm dealing with the dictionary that holds two keys, name and URL. So I think you were right, Kenny, right? We definitely want to use this key of name, but where do we use it? And let me pass this question off to Kaylee.
Would we put name after move? Not moves with a plural, but just move?
Yeah, at the very end, right? We could run that, and now we should just be getting Fire Punch. And regardless of the Pokemon that we pass in here, so we could put something like Squirtle, and that should still return us the second move that they have available, which in this case it's Ice Punch. All right. Now, why did we go through that exercise? What was the point of this, right? Of interacting with this API to be able to grab some keys and indexes. Well, this is how, oh, go for it, Ronnie.
Oh, never mind, never mind. It's okay.
Now I want to hear your perspective now. It's too late. Let's hear
Oh man, yeah. Oh no, I hit the button by accident. My finger slipped.
it.
No, but I would say the purpose of this exercise is to kind of allow us to see how importing requests and the specific yeah, how to use the importing requests and how to find the values.
Nice. So I don't want you guys to concentrate on the request portion, right? Because this is all additional content that we're going to be covering on later on. But what I want to make sure that you guys understand is how important it is for you guys to know what data it is that you're working with, right? Simon didn't go about this the wrong way at all. He was able to figure out, hey, well, if I take a look at the interface, I can see there that there's moves, that I have some arrays. I want to enter the second one, etc. right? But Simon's already at the point where when he sees this, he doesn't just see a nice little interface where it's telling me, hey, these are labels that are attached to something. He's seeing an object with a lot of keys, right? He told me, hey, I want to go into the moves of keys. After going to the moves of keys, he didn't just say, I want to go into the second one. He said, I want to enter the number one because he's thinking about indexes, right? He was able to recognize he is within a list and he wants to enter index one. From there, we need to be able to recognize we are again interacting with an object and we need to grab the move, right? So, really fantastic job. This is just interpreting data. This is how all real life data gets interpreted, right? We use nothing but complex and primitive data types to write out a representation of whatever it is that we're trying to send over the web. Now, programmatically, there may be a lot of things that we do under the hood to format, make things look nice, make sure that a squared plus b squared does in fact equal c squared, right? But everything is just primitive and complex data types working with one another. All right. At this point in our lecture, we've covered the following. We covered what is JavaScript and Python, why we're learning JavaScript and Python, the commonalities and differences. We set up Docker for both of them. We talked about variables, went to the print and console log statements, talked about type and type of. We discussed strings, numbers, booleans, null, none, and undefined. We then dove into complex data types, such as arrays, objects, and we do have a couple of other methods here. We saw the only key values, but we haven't actually seen the values. So let's talk about that really quickly here. I'm gonna bring back some formatting that I had. All right. All right. So now let's go ahead and view only keys, which is something that you may have to do from time to time. We actually just went through this process of only viewing keys. Well, JavaScript also allows you to do this by utilizing object.keys and then passing in the name of the object. The syntax is a little bit different, but the overall plan is exactly the same. All right, this should return a list or array of all the keys that are available. All right. And if we want to see values, it's exactly the same way. We just change it from keys to values. And that would return all the values within that object or dictionary. And if I want to see both, then I ask for items in Python. And in JavaScript, we ask for entries. And that gives me a list of list where every list or every nested list represents a key and value pair. All right, now we covered everything. At this point, does anyone have any questions regarding primitive or complex data types? Okay, fantastic. In that case, let's go ahead and stop our recording here.